All right, so now that we're officially started here, and Mike's a lot smarter than me, so he can figure all this stuff out. We are going to do, I want to make sure this is on. We're good. All right, so we're going to do a lecture on, well, I prepared this for Utah, and it was on jumper's knee, but it's actually going to be on just tendons in general, because this does apply to all the tendons of the body. So what it's basically going to be about is what tendons do, why they're important for athletic development, how they help you run, jump, sprint, all that stuff. And it's going to be applicable mostly in terms of what you guys will deal with. Usually the Achilles, quadricep tendon, and then usually the patella tendon. So those are the common ones that I get people to ask about. You could apply it probably to like tennis elbow and things like that. But you need to remember that this is specific to tendons. So I'm not saying that this carries over to muscles. I'm not saying this carries over to ligaments. I'm saying tendons, all right? So if it's not a tendon, don't make the assumption that everything that I said should be applied to the other tissues, all right? I also want to say that this content is not my own, okay? I just compiled it and put together a PowerPoint. I didn't actually invent this. I didn't do research or anything, I didn't do the research. Most of it is from 3 researchers who are Australian, Craig Purdom, Ebony Rio, and then Jill Cook. I just took it and adapted it to jumping athletes because that's a population that I'm very interested in. I probably care about jumping athletes more than anyone on planet Earth. I've been obsessed with it since I was 14. So all of this is because I was obsessed with it myself, but it just happens to be applicable to most every other athlete. So where are we going today? We are going to talk, like I said, basics of tendons, how they function, what is tendonitis, tendinopathy, what effect or why it affects jumping and sprinting, why it affects the athletes that we work with, especially if we are interested in working with elite athletes, which most of us are. We're also going to talk about a tendon load and then a load management program, and then lastly, how to get rid of it. With you guys, we'll be able to go into a lot more detail because you guys are smarter. I'm going to try to be entertaining so that you don't fall asleep, i.e. Vanessa. And so that being said, what do tendons do, and what is their role? That's where we're going to start out here. So first things first, tendons are super strong. They are extremely good at bearing load. That's why we have this picture of Superman here. They connect the bone to the muscle, and they are responsible for transferring energy to your limbs and to an implement or the ground, and letting your body move over space, or like I said, move an implement or whatever else. So they're super strong. What you need to remember is that healthy tendons do not tear. Okay, healthy tendons are extremely, extremely strong. Healthy tendons don't tear. So tendons are like extension springs. This is an extension spring here. They stretch, basically, store energy, and then they release that energy when they compress. So they're capable of helping us jump higher, run faster. They store and release the energy in those activities to allow us to do those things better than other people. Mike has talked about this, but tendons in sprinting, specifically the Achilles, is going to be responsible largely for our success in being able to produce a lot of force on the ground in a very short period of time. Okay, so I'll ask you guys a question. If you are a sprinter, right, how much time do you have at top end sprinting to apply force to the ground? If you paid attention to Mike's lecture, you'll know the answer to this question. A little, but how much?
Like ground contact?
Yeah, how much is ground contact?
So like 0.2 seconds.
Slow. That's acceleration.
We haven't
0.1.
We haven't done that much yet.
Oh, you haven't done that one? Oh, it'd be 200 milliseconds, I guess. So in milliseconds is 80 milliseconds, right? About 80 milliseconds to apply force to the ground, all right? So to do that, your muscle could not possibly be responsible for generating the majority of that force. What's likely happening is the muscle is isometric and the tendon is lengthening, storing energy, and then releasing it, specifically in the Achilles. There's other things that go into that, but that is a major contributor to success in sprinting. In jumping, it's maybe a little bit different. If you're looking at depending on the type of jump, because every jump has a different strategy, you're probably going to store most of the energy in the patella. You could also store it in the Achilles as well. Those are going to be the big ones that are responsible for jumping high. A couple other things you need to know. Tendons are viscoelastic. Does anyone know what viscoelastic means?
It has like a combination of viscous and elastic properties.
Yeah, so it can be compliant and it can be stiff, and depending on how compliant or stiff it is, it can store and release differing amounts of energy. If you guys were to put your hand on your patella tendon underneath your kneecap, okay, and you feel it while your knee is just at rest, it should be soft, right? And then if I said push your toe to your ground, or push your toe to the ground, or slide your foot forward, you're going to feel that the tendon the muscle will generate force, and the tendon will stiffen. All right. So we can go into a little bit of Hooke's law because it's relevant for you guys and for this, and you guys are smart. But does anyone know what Hooke's law is or what it says? Basically, I know David does, but is anyone else familiar with that? No. Okay. So David.
It's force is equal to the spring constant times the displacement of what that spring goes into, and so that's transferable to like the energy of like a spring constant energy. So yeah.
Yes. So basically, what that means is your tendon has a certain stiffness, right? Depending on how much muscular force is being applied to the tendon, and then that stiffness will give you back energy for every little bit that it's stretched. Okay, so if you think about Usain Bolt, when he's sprinting upright and his foot hits the ground, if his calf is under a higher tension, okay, as he hits the ground, the tendon is going to be stiffer, which means that it's a stiffer spring. So for every 1 centimeter that spring lengthens, it's going to give you a lot of energy back. All right, so that is partially why strong muscles and then obviously a stiff tendon can give you a lot of return on your investment into the ground. All right. So that is also important here moving forward. So tendons have a load basically placed on them, and that load can be defined simplistically in a couple different ways. But one of the things that is very important to that is repetitiveness. So meaning how many times does the tendon store and release energy, okay? Tendons are cellular. They have cells in them. They have tenocytes in them, and they're made of collagen and elastin and a couple other things. Different types of collagen that make that tendon up. And the number of times that you store and release energy is going to place a higher or lower load on the tendon. Okay, so it's different for me to go out and run a 100-meter dash one time than it is for me to run the 100-meter dash through rounds, right? That's going to be a higher tendon load. Or if I just do one jump as opposed to like 1,000 cuts, or 1,000 jumps, sorry, or one cut as opposed to 1,000 cuts. How many times you load the tendon is obviously going to stress it more. Okay. The next thing is speed. How fast do you load the tendon? So if you have an extension spring and you pull it really slowly and release it really slowly, that's going to place a lower load on the tendon. If you pull it really quick and then it stores and releases energy really quickly, that is going to be a higher tendon load. All right. So if you are jogging versus sprinting as opposed to sprinting, there's going to be a different load on the tendon because there's a different speed. However, typically when you sprint, you don't do as many contacts, right? So if I'm running 10 miles, there's a lot more repetitiveness there. So you might actually form a tendinopathy or tendonitis on the Achilles in jogging where you wouldn't do that in sprinting. Okay, so speed is also very important depending on, or in terms of dictating tendon load. So how long is the tendon when you apply that force? If you are at a really, really high, or I guess it would be the tendon's very long and you apply the force, then it's going to place a higher load on the tendon as well. All right, so in sprinting, right, we do what with the foot? Anyone? Good, guys, this is embarrassing. All right.
In sprinting?
Yes.
Toe up?
You toe up, you dorsiflex, which does what to the Achilles?
Stretches it.
Puts it on stretch, okay, which if you know anything about like anatomy, right, that connects to the gastroc runs in terms of fascia into the hamstring runs up to the hip, and then obviously you can apply force to the ground. So people, when they pull their toe up, can load that chain, and then they can apply more force to the ground. That's why we put the toe up position. Now that gives you more force, okay, it's better at letting you run fast. However, it also is going to place a higher load on the tendon, all right? So how long the tendon is going to dictate that. Now think about this one as well. If I'm on the bottom of a squat, all right, say that I'm doing a power clean, right? And have you guys ever seen people like bottom out in a clean or something like that? Like they just like catch it all the way at the bottom and they just like hammer the ground and bounce out of it. The tendon load there would be probably very, very high if it weren't for the wrapping effect, but just based on the speed, the length of the tendon, and then and then the repetitiveness, people just doing it over and over again, the patella could potentially take a very, very high tendon load from doing that. All right, so to simplify it here, the three things that are going to dictate your tendon load are going to be your joint angle, the output, and then the speed. All right, so yes.
What is the wrapping effect?
Wrapping effect is the calf sitting on the hamstring, so it's this. And it is why the bottom of a squat can unload a little bit, because your thigh is actually sitting on your calf. At the knee, yes.
Okay.
Like the output, people can use it to bounce out of the bottom. I don't know exactly about like the stiffness and the force and the output and the EMG activity, but it explains some of the variability in those measurements, because sometimes you won't see huge activity where you would expect it because your thigh is sitting on your calf.
Okay.
All right, so tendon load, like I said, joint angle, output, and speed. All right. Another way you could say this is the more the tendon acts like a fast spring, the more stress on the tendon. So if it is storing and releasing energy really quickly, it's going to be very, very high load, high stress on the tendon. When we think about anything that happens in our field with athletes, usually this is what we're looking to do, right? This is the thing we want to get better at. So if this is the thing you want to get better at, you're probably going to have tendon issues, right? If I'm a sprinter and I want to get better at sprinting, I need to sprint, and that's the thing I need to do to sprint fast. If I'm a jumper, I want to jump high, that's the thing I need to do to jump high. But it also places a very high load on the tendon.
But that's with a time variable, correct? Because you mentioned earlier how jogging could create a tendinitis because there's more stress on the tendon, but that's over a longer period of time.
Yeah, so that would be overloading repetitiveness, right? Like you just did the same thing over and over and over again until you just loaded the tendon too much,
Yeah,
right? So,
but it's a small load.
but it's a low load, but you did it a ton of times. So that could have a high tendon load. So it's volume and intensity. It's not just going to be volume or just intensity, right? If I do one jump, I try to explain this to jumpers all the time. If I do one jump at maximum intensity, is that going to be as high of a tendon load as doing 1,000 jump rope contacts? I mean, it might, but it probably not, right? I mean, depending on how low intensity the jump rope contact was. But you might actually have I don't know how you would quantify this, but you might have imposed a higher stress on the tendon through jump roping, right? So it's dependent on those variables as well. This is a really important thing here because the anatomy of this is important. Structure does not equal pain, okay? If you could have a tendon that is extremely degenerated, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna have pain in the tendon, all right? So this next slide here is adapted, I guess is the word, from Jill Cook. And basically she created this continuum, and she basically said, okay, normal tendon when you start out, everyone's tendons are healthy, right? You got a healthy tendon, and then you start imposing a load that exceeds the capacity of that tendon, and your tendon moves down this continuum, all right? So for those of you that don't know, tendons are cellular, okay? They basically are tenocytes, and those tenocytes release collagen, and that collagen builds and molds the tendon, all right? She also has a little bit of research that shows that once you're past a certain age, you're probably not doing very much in the way of changing the collagen matrix. You can change the function of it, but you're probably not doing much in the way of actually changing the makeup of the tendon. So tendons aren't necessarily all degenerative or all reactive or in disrepair or whatever. It's in sections, right? So if I did an ultrasound of my knee or my elbow or whatever else, I bet you if we did it on every single person in this room, there would be parts of your tendon that are in reactive tendinopathy or are in tendon disrepair. Okay, like probably there's a good chance of that. Now it might not be symptomatic, but there's probably some of us that are in those areas for those tendons. So it's not the whole tendon, it's just parts of it. See, Mike? So normal tendons, healthy, really good at bearing load. Reactive tendinopathy means that you imposed a stress on it. It's probably the load that you imposed is probably a little bit higher than the capacity of the tendon, and so you're moving down the continuum. What dictates pain is how fast you move down the continuum, not where you are in the continuum, all right? Once you get to this stage, your tendon does not come out of it, okay? So you can move up and down, or specifically this maybe is a good way of doing it. You can move in and out of disrepair, and you can move in and out of reactive tendinopathy, and you can move to a normal tendon. But once you have a degenerative tendon, it's dead. It means that you killed it. You killed the cells inside of it. It doesn't bear load anymore, and you're actually interventions focused on trying to change the pathology or the tendon structure are useless. It doesn't matter.
So when someone has like a ruptured Achilles during like surgery, are they like stitching it back together, or are they replacing it with something?
I don't know the answer to that question totally, but I'm fairly confident that they basically tack it. I think they can replace it,
Yeah.
but I'm fairly confident that they tack it together. And then,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that there's probably a timeline for the amount of time that those collagen fibers can realign.
Yeah.
But I mean, tendons are super, super strong. So whatever they're trying to put it together with,
Yeah.
or if they're tacking it together, replacing it with maybe another tendon or ligament or whatever, however they're deciding to do it, it's probably not going to have the same load bearing capacity. So
Yeah.
that's why if you do rupture your Achilles, there's a lot of people that don't come back from that sort of injury because it's a full rupture. It's hard to get it to store and release energy the same way,
Yeah.
even if they were. That's probably the thing that made them good in the first place. It's probably why they tore it. So yeah, that's a good question though. So this is really important because it's not the structure that dictates your intervention. Okay, it's moving in and out of whatever part of the continuum you're in. That's what you want to do to address the tendon. All right. All right, we'll go on here. So this guy's name is Chris John. Okay, this is a 10-foot rim. I think he was like competing or something like that, and he's probably got running. I don't know, maybe like he tested at 45 on a vertex. So in this jump, he's getting his head of the rim. I'm not going to go into the physics of that, but because if you did the math, you would say, well, his vertical's got to be over 48 or something like that. But he's about 6 foot. In this jump, gets his whole head over the rim. Super, super impressive. So when you're looking at why jumping athletes in particular have tendon issues, this is logical, right? I mean, you're taking someone that jumps 50 some inches in the air, and they're not only applying the force to jump that high, but then they're dealing with the landing forces. And if you look at how he lands, it's usually not going to be this perfect landing, right? So why are we seeing athletes get tendon issues? What's the tendon load on the patella? It's fucking huge. Like you're basically all the way down in a deep squat. Like you're all the way down in a deep squat. Your knees are super far over the toes, and then you're trying to push out of that position with a lot of speed and apply as much force as you possibly can. So the tendon's long, super, super deep angle, right? You're doing it, usually guys are doing it over and over again, and it's super fast. So why does my knee hurt? Well, that's probably why your knee hurts, because you're doing something that's inherently intense. This is Mutaz Barshin. This is like probably the guy that's going to break the world record in high jump. I think he's clean, but I don't know. But anyways, that bar is probably like 7 foot, and he just skies it. Like it's not really even difficult for him. So this is probably the most intense thing that you could possibly do to your patella tendon. Okay, you're running into a single leg jump, so you're dealing with twice the force. There's 14 times body weight on a single leg here. When he actually contacts the ground and is starting to jump upwards, he's pushing backwards into the ground. His knee is stopping. It's bending a little bit and then extending. And to do that, he needs to apply a shit ton of force. Okay, so if you do that over and over and over again, you run into a jump at like 8 meters per second, you're probably going to run into issues with your tendon. All right, it makes perfect sense. So once again, you have speed, high force, not as much knee flexion, but you're jumping off one leg. That's why you don't have as much knee flexion, because you can't. All right. So what actually causes the pain? That's kind of the question that we need to answer. We know that moving down the continuum causes pain, but what in terms of anatomy is actually giving our brains the sensory input and saying this hurts? Well, there's nerves on the outside of the tendon. Okay, that is the endotendon is where the pain is being, where the sensing is occurring. Okay, so it's on the outside of the tendon. There's a bunch of nerve cells. Those nerve cells pick up the input and basically tell your brain. So it's in your head. It's cerebral, and is that the right? Or it's in your cortex. Your prefrontal cortex basically says, this is painful. I need to stop doing whatever I'm doing. The difference with tendon injuries is also this. Athletes with tendon injuries, typically, the thing that made them great is now the thing that's inhibiting them. Okay, so if I'm a freak athlete and I can cut super hard and I can jump super high and I can just like go up on any given second and dunk on people, the thing that probably made me good was partially my tendons. And now I can't actually use the thing that makes me good, so I'm a worse player, and you can't jump through it. You can't do strength training. There's a ton of stuff that does not work. All right, so things that, and I'll go over this just because it is important, things that do not work, that we know don't work, stretching the tendon does not work. You're imposing a load to an already stressed tissue. It doesn't work. all right? Ibuprofen, not gonna solve it, not even close, all right? There's actually there's very little inflammation in a tendon, all right? I know we say tendonitis. The continuum that we just looked at, it goes tendonitis, reactive tendinopathy, and then degenerative tendinopathy. Okay, so pathological means you've actually changed the tissue, or there's a pathology in the tissue. It acts differently than a healthy one. So if you have reactive tendonitis, like you just went out, you've never played basketball, you start jumping a ton, your knees hurt, ibuprofen will probably help that because there's a little bit of inflammation. But if you're like a jumper that's had chronic knee pain for years, like do you guys know in the soccer group, the one girl, like she like can't even run at this point because her knees are so bad?
Yeah.
That's what happens, right? You basically get to a point where you can't do what made you good in the first place. You can't use it anymore. So imagine a banana peel. That is where the tendons are, or that is where the nerve cells are in a tendon. All right, they're on the outside of it. So you'll have some people that have really, really necrotic, dead tendons, and they don't even know it because it's maybe in a different part of the tendon, and they won't even feel it. But they're at a massive risk for actually tearing their tendon. Usually they jump through pain long enough and the pain goes away, but they're actually at risk of, like I said, tearing the tendon. They just don't know it. So jump training is inherently intense, okay? You're dealing with massive forces, right? If you were to jump off of that box, massive forces between the joints, between the tendons, on the muscles. If you're running into a jump, we already demonstrated it's 14 times body weight on a single leg. Does anyone know what sprinting is? Sprinting, 6 times body weight. 6 times body weight on a single leg. Jumping is at peak force is 14. Okay, so that's 12, like 10 to 14. I've seen differing numbers, but that's massive. That's like insanely high, even if it's only for an instant. And the training to get better requires you to do all the things that load the tendon as well. So here's what you have happening, right? I want to get my vertical jump up. Oh, okay. What are you gonna do? Oh, I'm gonna jump a lot. Oh, what else are you gonna do? I'm gonna lift a lot. Oh, okay. Well, how are you gonna lift? Explosively. Like really explosively? Oh, well, how do you jump high? We give you your quads stronger. Oh, so what are you gonna do? I'm gonna train my quads explosively. I'm gonna do a lot of deep squats. I'm gonna try to blast out of the bottom. I'm gonna do depth jumps. I'm gonna do sprinting. All of those things are inherently quad dominant and loading the tendon massively. So if you're trying to train for jumping, on top of jumping, you're just imposing a massive load to the body and specifically the tendons. Something will probably break down. The other thing, function impacts output. There's a lion here, so lions are, they're intense, powerful. If you get hurt, you cage the lion. You can't. You basically put it in a box. You don't let it out. You don't let it eat. You don't let it do anything, and it becomes weak. It becomes unable to hunt. That's basically what happens to an athlete when they have a tendinopathy. Okay, you get pain, and it impacts your output. You're unable to do the things, once again, that made you the athlete that you were, right? If I am a jumper and I have patellar tendonitis, my quadricep becomes smaller. It atrophies right away. If you guys were to actually look at my quads, you could see the left one is atrophied because I haven't been doing anything for my patellar tendonitis, and that is my body's way. My brain actually, subconsciously, I'm not using my quad, and people guard all the time. What happens is if you put EMGs on it, instead of your quad firing in gradiating force, it wouldn't do that anymore. It would not fire, and then all of the force would turn on. Or all the muscle would turn on and all the force would be applied, and it tugs on the tendon, applies a massive tendon load to it, an already damaged tendon, it hurts, and then you guard more. And it's just this positive feedback loop. So now you go to jump, and you can't even use your quadricep because you have tendinopathy and you can't use the muscle the way that you used to. So you need to also address that issue as well, other than the fact that you have a ton of pain. Now your quad doesn't work the way it used to, or your calf doesn't work the way it used to. So now you have all these issues that you need to address to get your athlete back to being at a high level, all right? So how do we do that? The only thing that works is a load management program. Everything else is putting a Band-Aid on it, okay? You can't do an injection, you can't stretch it, you can't take ibuprofen, you can't massage it. None of those things, none of those interventions are actually, it's like, it doesn't matter. Those things at the end of the day will not dictate success when you're trying to get an athlete to return to play with a tendon issue, all right? So most times, if we know this, right? If we know this is the way to get people healthy, why don't people do it? Why aren't people doing this? Why didn't Kobe Bryant do this to get his Achilles healthy before it ruptured? Why did that not occur if we know how to do it? Because he's a professional athlete. Kobe Bryant goes in the gym and he's like, I gotta put up 1,000 shots today because I'm the greatest basketball player in the history of the world. That's what he says in his mind. LeBron James is better. But that's why athletes aren't gonna do it, because they have to stop doing what they're gonna do, all right, or what they're competing in. So the first thing you have to do is address movement. All right, you need to look at the hip, knee, ankle, and spine. If the movement sucks and you're not loading the tendon axially, you're probably gonna have issues, okay? So if I'm a 2-footed jumper, it makes sense for me to stand in line, squat down, and squat straight up. However, that's not how jumping is, okay? There's forces in every single plane, and sprinting happens in every single plane. Sprinting is probably maybe a little more linearly, but obviously your shoulders are rotating, you're moving side to side like this, so you're probably not gonna apply force all in that plane. It's just not gonna happen. So you can clean it up as much as possible to make it as safe as possible and make it as efficient as possible, but the nature of what you're doing is not like perfectly aligned, right? You're not in a machine doing up down with your knee. So try to address it as much as possible, but try to remember that changing the movement too much is gonna make them a worse athlete. It's gonna take away the thing that makes them good. And if I'm a high jumper and you tell me to do something that's gonna make me jump low, I'm not gonna do it, all right? So what is the goal of the load management program? All right, the first thing that you need to do is you need to get rid of pain. Okay, if you have pain, then you're not gonna be able to get the quadricep healthy, you're not gonna be able to progress, and you're not gonna be able to eventually get the athlete to return to play. Your interventions are useless if you don't get rid of pain. All right, so we know that our intervention needs to be addressed at impacting the nerves in the endotendon. All right, that's what our intervention needs to be focused on. So how we do that, how we progress up from that, is going to be with isometrics. All right, so I'll talk about this a little bit later, but that's probably the first thing that we need to do. After that, in terms of moving upwards, we need to get the athlete prepared to apply force, and we need to prepare them for the demands of their sport, right? So typically this is where you'll do strength work, and then after that, you're gonna work back into jumping, okay? So we need to start at addressing pain, then we need to improve their strength, and then we need to improve their ability to store and release energy in their tendons. All right, that is how we're gonna plan this this cycling for training. All right.
Is most of this unilateral?
Not necessarily. So it depends on what you're doing, right? If I feel pain pushing laterally and I need to do that for my sport, then I need to.
Or high jumper who plants on their right foot.
If they plant on their right foot, then they're dealing with all the force. You have all the force in all the planes, so you need to.
Do they plant on their left foot and get a unilateral bilateral transfer?
What do you mean by that?
Like they work their left leg harder, so their right leg gets stronger because there's symmetry in the body.
Well, so that would be getting into the what's the name of that? Where you train one side? Yeah, the crossover effect. So I think that's mostly been observed in upper body exercises. I don't know if it's actually been observed in lower body, but you guys could verify that if you guys know research. You could look that up. But typically, what will happen in a unilateral jumper is one leg will get way stronger and one leg will get way weaker, and there's two reasons for that. One, high jumpers have to lower, so they're typically here. So this leg gets really strong because it's used to holding their weight, and then this leg is very elastic. So they're just used to popping off the ground very quickly on this leg and jumping high with the elastic leg. So it will happen, but I don't think it's necessarily like what's causing the issue. All right, so we're gonna simplify periodization. You don't even really need this. It's not really applicable, okay? So you need to kind of forget everything that you know about all of the, don't forget it, but kind of put it in the back of your head, in the back of your mind, because general specific, low to high intensity, high to low volume, undulating periodization, it doesn't really apply here because you can't train, right? You can't even do the things you need to do to improve performance. You're just trying to get the athlete back to doing what they were doing without pain, all right? So how we do that is we're gonna use the numeric pain scale, all right? So this is Mr. He's upset. This is Mr. Happy, this is no pain. This is where athletes typically start, and your goal is to get them less than a 3 doing their activity, okay? So every single day with athletes that have issues, they should be keeping a record of their pain, 1 to 10. And this is extremely important because the first thing that you need to do is address pain, right? So when my knee was really bad, like it was just horrible, I would use a test that I would use was walking down the stairs. So you have to pick a standardized test Because if I go from a squat to walking downstairs to a single leg squat to jumping, each morning it's going to change because I did a different activity with a different tendon load, right? Higher tendon load is going to probably cause more pain. What else you need to remember is tendons have a latent response to pain, meaning if I go out and I jump 1,000 times, my knee might feel fine, but the next morning I wake up, I'm gonna feel like absolute shit and I'm not gonna be able to walk downstairs. So it is very important that you remember that, because this test should be done on the following day, 24 to 48 hours after whatever activity you did, right? So if I'm a jumper, then that means that I jump, right after it probably feels fine. As the day goes on, 24 hours later, it starts to feel worse. Next morning, it feels horrible. I do my test, which is maybe a body weight squat, maybe it's walking downstairs, maybe it's a calf raise if it's my Achilles, and it's like let's say it's like a 6 or a 7, maybe even an 8, right? So that's why we need to use the MPS, and we need to use it on a consistent basis with a consistent test. All right, so let's say for jumping, just because this is the one that I'm most used to, we use walking downstairs, right? So on the quad tendon or patella tendon. So 1 to 10, let's say I walk downstairs and it's like a 6, I want to write that down and keep it in the back of my head. And my goal is to get that down to less than a 3, all right? We need to work smarter, not harder, meaning you have to stop doing the thing that you were doing that made your knee or your Achilles or whatever else hurt, okay? So you can't just go and try to jump through it, you can't train through it. The first thing that you have to do is remove the load that you imposed on the tendon that was too high in the first place, all right? So the very first thing you need to do is stop doing whatever you were doing, and that is usually the hardest part for people to get over. Because if you tell a tennis player, hey, stop playing tennis, what are they gonna do? Eat shit, I'm gonna play tennis, all right? But you have to try to convince them, you have to give them buy-in to try to get them to do the intervention. And the big issue with this is when you're dealing with athletes in season, they're so far screwed already before anything even started, right? If I have a volleyball player and they have to play games, and my coach is making me practice, and I'm trying to do an intervention as an S&C coach or a therapist, you really have no control over that, because you have to say this athlete needs to stop doing whatever they're doing or it's going to get worse. And guess what their coach is going to say? I want to win. So usually what you'll see is coaches will just put people through the whole season and completely blow them up, and then they come back into the season and they're maybe even still hurt because they didn't go through a load management program, start the season, and then it's this negative feedback cycle. If you look at some of the jumpers at these Division I programs, it happens all the time. They'll start out coming in jumping 7 foot, 7'6", 7'8", whatever. Females jumping 6'2", 6'4", and then by their junior year, they can't even jump. They can't even make it through a meet. Or sprinters will do the same thing and they can't even run a 100-meter dash. And it's like, well, what happened? Well, you didn't do anything to change the fact that they're in pain all the time. It's super common with the high jumpers all the time, all right? When you tell an athlete to stop, they usually get afraid. They're like, no, there's no chance. I'm gonna lose all my ability to jump. I'm gonna lose all my ability to sprint, lose all my ability to cut. I'm gonna lose every skill possible. Like basketball players, you tell them that, like a hooper, someone who just plays ball all the time, and you go, hey, I need you to stop playing basketball. They're gonna be like, no, 0% chance I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna go play, I'm gonna put up 1,000 shots for 3 hours twice a day because Devin Williams from 10,000 Hours in the Lab told me I have to. And it's like, well, that's stupid. Like, you're probably not going to lose your shot. Ray Allen would literally do nothing, come in and just throw up threes for like 5 minutes and he had a shot back. Usually they're not going to, in the time period it takes to get them healthy, they're not going to lose all the coordination and motor pathways to do whatever they need to do. All right, so you need to remember that. It'll be okay. That's what you have to tell them. It'll be okay. You'll be okay. You have to talk them down from a ledge. Half the time when I'm working with athletes, it's literally just telling them you need to relax. It'll be fine. You're not going to die. All right. So there's 3 phases that we're going to do with this. The first one that we're going to implement is isometrics. All right. So if this is the patella here, this is the intervention that we want to implement. We want to put them on any exercise, and you'll see me do this all the time, and you guys make fun of me. But you need to put them on. You need to put them on an isometric first, because there's good evidence to support that it makes pain go down instantly. Okay, it increases the strength of the muscle, and it gets rid of that inhibition that happened earlier. Remember when I said it doesn't gradient force? Now you gradient force. It takes a while, and you have to focus. I tell people to kind of feel their quad as they're doing their exercise or whatever it is, or maybe somehow you could like feel your calf. I don't know. You have to focus though. That's the only way you can change the cortical response in the brain. All right. So what you're going to do with this is use it as a pill. You're going to do it every day, and you're going to do 5 sets, 45 seconds to 70% load, and I'll go over, or I have another slide about that later. but I use it as basically ibuprofen, all right? Whenever athletes come to me and they say, I have tendon pain, this is the first thing that I'm gonna do, all right? So if it's not actually tendon pain, then this will not work. But if it is tendon pain, this immediately will get people to go from like a 6 to a 4, or a 5 to a 3, or a 7 to a 4. It's really important though that you make sure you load the tendon, okay? Why is it that we start with isometrics? Why is that logical to start with an isometric? Based on what I talked about earlier.
Tendon's not gonna stretch out. Well, it would be like
There's no change in the length of the tendon, right? You're literally just holding a load. So if you're just holding weight, it's the lowest load that you can place on the tendon. It's not, all it's doing is holding. It's not storing and releasing energy dynamically. You're at a short length, right? Because your knee is fully extended. And the output is the only load that you're applying, which is good because you need to stress the tendon, all right? That's how you're gonna get it to be pain-free to regain its function, all right? So your intervention the goal of it is not to change the form of the tendon, it's to change the function of the tendon, all right? So this is the first thing we're gonna do is get it pain-free, and we're gonna start building strength, and we're gonna start returning you back to play, basically, or getting you back to the function that you had.
I've read studies that for Achilles tendonitis, it talks about doing eccentric.
The support on that is actually not very good.
Yeah.
Usually, so have you guys ever heard about decline boards? Eccentrics they actually load the tendon more than the person is probably capable of doing. This is a better starting point. Because it will prepare the tendon, because you're placing a high tendon load on it. However, if the load you're applying to the tendon is higher than the capacity, what's gonna happen? You're gonna get hurt. It's gonna get worse. And that's usually what happens. I go on my decline board, I'm like, oh, I got it, yeah. Well, you just placed like a ton of load on the tendon that was already injured in the first place. So of course it's gonna make it worse. And that's typically what people do. If you're really early on in that and you just stop doing what you're doing and do strength work, which is what most people do, and your tendon gets better, like no shit, Sherlock, right? You stopped doing what you were doing in the first place. That made it bad. You did the first step well, you stopped doing what made it bad. And then you started doing strength work, which loading the tendon will make it better. If you do it like 2 times a week, your tendon's probably gonna get out of tendinitis. But if you're in tendinopathy, you're probably gonna move down the continuum, and it's probably gonna get worse. Some people won't, but the majority, and I tried this myself, it will get worse.
Yeah, because I read studies where when I had tendinitis, it said like build up, and you're basically doing like 5 or 6 sets of like 20 eccentric deloads, and literally you'd be doing hundreds in a day. And I started doing it, and then by like the 3rd day, it would hurt even more.
Yeah, it's
so
worse. It's gonna get worse. Yeah, and you stop doing it, you're like, oh, it feels better.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. So the evidence is not that strong for it.
Yeah.
It's actually up in the air. Like, because if it worked, people would just be doing it. I see people say that all the time on like decline boards. That's not gonna help, or calf raises or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just, there's a place for it, but we'll talk about that later. So how do you get pain-free? What's the first thing you need to do? You need to do isometrics every day. Okay, why do we have to do them every day? Is because if you don't load a degenerative reactive tendinopathy, if you don't load a tendinopathy, the tendon gets softer. It actually gets weaker. Like right now, I haven't done anything for my knee. If I did like 2 jumps, I would be in pain the next day because I just like haven't done anything and my tendon's soft and it's not ready to bear any load. Like I'm incapable of doing anything. You guys knew that anyways. All right, anyways, so we're doing this 3 times a day is typically like the sweet spot. So you can do it multiple times a day. Typically, I'll tell people you need to do 5 sets of 45 seconds, 70% load with a 2 minutes rest. If your pain does not go down, you either didn't do it long enough or you didn't go heavy enough. And I see this over and over and over again. People will message me on Instagram or whatever else, like, hey, I looked at your video, someone directed me here, they said you're good with knee pain, and I did the isometrics and my knee didn't feel better. And I'm like, well, how heavy did you do it? Well, I did it with a 6-pound kettlebell. That's probably why it doesn't feel better, because you're not even close to 70% load, all right? Like, most times it's gonna take people probably 25 plus pounds to get to about 70% of max voluntary contraction.
Oh.
With a kettlebell.
So how do you know what would be max?
Basically how I just see when right before they start shaking, right before they have muscle vibration. But most people, like I know where I'm at and I just gauge it accordingly. So I know if I really wanted to on like a leg curl machine or leg extension machine, I could do like 100 pounds if there was a cam pulley system, maybe more if like I really had to. And I know most girls are probably a little bit weaker than me, so maybe I start them if on that machine I might start them at 40 to 50, right? And they'll tell you if it gets hard. They'll be like, my leg's burning or my leg's shaking or whatever else. You want to try to go right before it's shaking. Some people, I will have them get to that muscle vibration point. You don't want that because you're basically, your tendon's just vibrating. So you're applying tiny loads to it. So you're not actually isometric. But I found that getting to that point early on actually sometimes helps people build strength faster and does help the tendon get pain-free sooner, like earlier. So for me, for example, I think I started with the green kettlebell and then I went to the yellow, and I think I had done the blue by the end. And you're talking about my tibia extended all the way out, you know what I mean? It's pretty high tendon load. The other thing that you can do is you can progress the angle downwards, right? Because remember, what dictates tendon load is the angle. So if you start with the leg fully extended and you progress your way down, or if you're doing isometrics on the calf and you start, typically you have to go single leg with weight on an Achilles. So I use a leg extension for the knee. For the Achilles, you just do a standing or seated calf raise basically, and just hold it. And usually you'll have to use a Smith machine and like load it up with a lot of weight because that's a very strong movement. So you have to eyeball it a little bit. It is sometimes tough. I've done it where I've done wall kicks basically, kick into a wall. I've sat between a door frame and just pushed as hard as possible for my Achilles before. That one's very intense. I don't recommend that one. But usually if you just I've done kettlebells and held it, and that made it a lot better very quick. The other thing with this is the whole time, if you have a tendinopathy and you're competing, you're probably gonna basically just make this part of your warm up. You have to have it every day because you need to impose a load to the tendon, all right? The other thing is you're gonna cycle the loading later. So this is really important. So the next thing that you're gonna do is you're gonna add in slow strength. All right, let's see this place. Oh, Brian! Hey, rest in peace, Brian. So this was pretty early on. This was basically, I started doing the isometrics every day for about a week, and it got pain-free, but I couldn't do anything else. Like if I would have jumped immediately, I would have had pain again. So I had to unload completely. I had to build in the isometrics every day. Before I did this, I would do isometrics as well. And then I put the band on there just because I wanted something for my hip because I couldn't really load up my hip that much. But I would do that every day, my hero. So I would do this every other day. So I'd have one day that was an isometric, one day that I would do slow strength. So I'm going on a 3 count or 4 count up, a 4 count down, all right? So why is the box there? Does anyone know on the force plate data where the highest force is?
The constant.
On a like jump?
Bottom.
On a counter movement jump? At the bottom, right? So if you go to a half squat and you turn it around, typically that brief isometric period, because you're changing momentum from negative vertical velocity to positive vertical velocity, you're gonna have a really high output, all right? So I put the box in there so that I could unload the movement, all right? And I would go really slow down on a 4 count and really slow up on a 4 count, all right? So you could do this with calf raises too. This is where they're appropriate. So people would say, well, how's that different than eccentric? Typically when you're doing the negatives, the tendon load's way higher, right? So this is how I started. I started with a bar, and then I moved up to doing 5K on each side, and then I added, what you typically want to do is every session, which you'll do every other day, you want to add about 2.5 to 5K. So it's like 5 to 10 pounds, okay? And your goal is you're adding function to the tendon, right? This will also help the tendon get pain-free. Typically, where I see it start to help is around, for guys, jumpers, is around 135 pounds, so 60K. They'll start to notice a difference. It doesn't have to be a leg press, you just need to find something that loads the tendon very, very slowly. Why are we going slow? What is that doing? Why not go up and down fast?
There's more force if you're going fast.
If you go super fast, you're just gonna overload the tendon, right away, immediately.
So when are you doing this?
Every other day. So what you do?
What I meant was, when do you start? Do you start from the...
Oh, so you start, you could do it whenever. When do you start? What's day one? Saturday or Sunday, you mean? Or Monday, or what day of the week?
No. So you showed us the isometrics first. Are you doing isometrics, you start those, and then you're also starting the slow tempo stuff?
No. So you start with just isometrics. You're gonna do that for about a week or two until the pain is less than probably a 3, all right? Or until it stabilizes, basically. They might not be less than a 3, but at the very least, you want it to go down and you want it to stabilize. The other thing with the isometrics, it lasts about 90 minutes. So it's not gonna last the whole day, but it has an analgesic response to the tendon, basically. All right, so it'll last 90 minutes, okay, and it'll be reduced, and then typically it might come back a little bit, but the next morning, because you applied a load to it, it'll feel better the next morning when you test it. Okay, so the other thing to remember, guys, is remember, you can't change the degenerative parts of the tendon, but you can change the reactive or tendonitis parts, so you're trying to move that up the continuum to where you're healthy. All right, that's really important. So how are we gonna do this? We're gonna add it in. Okay, we're adding things. So basically we started with our vegetables on the plate. Now we're adding our meat. Oh no, we're gonna say this is potatoes. So now we're adding potatoes to the plate here. So every other day, you need to be doing a slow strength exercise. You're gonna start with the isometrics before. You're still gonna do the isometrics every single day, literally probably for the rest of your life. And then you're gonna add in every other day, you're gonna do something that is gonna be addressing the tendon slowly in a strength exercise. So give me a couple different examples you could do for the patella. Also, what time is it? Oh, 2:37. What could you do for the patella? Slow strength.
Monster walks.
And
hip
Trap bar
abductors.
deadlift.
No.
What? Why not?
Because you're not trying to address the hip, you're trying to address the knee.
But the hips are related to the knees.
Yeah, so that's like the guru answer.
Okay, sorry.
Like, if you're actually talking about what's
Yeah.
gonna make a difference, you're addressing the tendon. You actually need to address the issue. So what exercises do I use my knee extensors?
Step up.
Step up,
Trap bar
What else?
deadlift.
drop bar deadlift,
Lunges.
leg extension,
Split squat.
lunges, split squat. Literally any lower body exercise that involves triple extension, you're probably gonna use, okay? As long as you can do it slowly and you can get to that 70% threshold, it's worth doing, all right? So what about the Achilles? This one's actually a good question. What is the difference between standing and seated calf raises?
The knee is flexed.
Oh, wow, that's very observant, Alex. That is true. The knee is indeed in flexion. In terms of musculature, what is the difference?
Yeah, sure.
Is when?
Standing.
Standing gastroc, soleus flexed, okay? So the gastroc tendon, for the gastroc guys, which, like, if you were to look at my lower leg, right, and I were to flex my calf here, I don't have the high super bally gastroc, but this is the gastroc here. Underneath it, that's gonna be the soleus, okay? So in this example, that's right there, all right? So it's underneath it. So if you're having pain at the bottom where it inserts, that's probably gonna be related to what, the gastroc or the soleus?
Soleus.
You think so?
It's probably both.
It could be both, but what do you think it is?
I would assume the soleus, because it's lower.
I would think more gastroc.
Gastroc, because it tapers down into the
You said
tendon
it's
tapers
lower?
down. Yeah, on the insertion of the bone.
Oh.
So the soleus, you're probably gonna have mid. You'll probably have mid. So usually what's gonna happen though, you're gonna wanna do both. You could do like 3 sets standing and 3 sets seated. If you don't have a seated calf raise machine, just put a plate on your knee and have some push up.
I was thinking of something earlier, sorry.
Is that funny?
No. When you said guru answer.
Guru? Am I guru?
Maybe.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Right on.
All right, so we're starting light and we're adding 5 to 10 pounds per session. All right, when do we start adding in, so like I said, 4 by 6 to 8 with a 4-second up down phase. When do we start adding in other stuff? Like what's the prerequisite strength you need to be at? Strong. What are you doing? Are you jumping? Because that's gonna be really intense. So you should probably be pretty strong before you start adding jumping back in. All right, so typically you have to use your intuition, follow your gut when you feel like they can start adding other things in. So now we have pain-free tendon and we can do strength work without pain. What should we do next? Jump maximum? No,
Maybe
that's
some
not.
light plyometrics.
Light plyometrics is good, but you're gonna do a full stress shortening cycle?
Not a full one.
Oh, you can do half one?
No.
How you can do half one?
No, I meant like not full range of motion at the joint.
But you're still gonna do them?
Sure.
No. So you got to remember,
Something
and this is related to both the Achilles and the patella. All right, this is a plane, maybe taking off, maybe landing. I don't know. But anyways, I'm gonna say it's landing. Okay, if you land like an idiot, okay, you're probably gonna have issues there, right? But you have to land before you can jump. All right, you can't just be like, well, I'm gonna go back to this super maximal, this jumping thing, because you need to be able to store energy before you store and release it. Okay, so landings allow you to work on storing energy fast. All right, so if you do an extension spring, it lets you stretch really quickly. You don't necessarily have to do the stress shortening cycle. You need to get used to absorbing force before you go back to a full jump. All right, so in a jump, for example, typically what happens is you're here, Okay, so you're in internal rotation, your body's like this, you're like in a super deep squat, your knee is super far over your toe, and then what happens is your knees dip down to the floor, so you get the tendon under a super, super big load, and then you take off, right? So what you need to do is be able to store that energy on the way down, so basically until this point, before you store and then release it very quickly, all right? So we need to do landings, all right? So this is one of the Russians. You guys have seen this before as well. They would just do crazy shit. They just like jump off boxes that were like 5 feet high. But they could store and release a lot of energy. That being said, you don't necessarily need to get to this point, but if you're an athlete who's applying 14 times body weight to the ground, you probably need to be pretty good at storing energy before you're gonna store and release energy on a single leg, right? So typically what I do is I start them on a low box, progress the box up, and then you progress from double leg to single leg. Okay, because that's going to get you most prepared to handle the next load. This is where most people screw up because they'll add in stuff too quickly. So how we're going to do this, guys, is we're going to have 1 day of landings first. We're going to do 1 day of slow strength and 1 day of isometrics, and then we're just going to repeat that over and over and over again. Yes, Rob?
Is an isometric
Yes.
every day?
Yes. Isometrics are every day still. Next point, isometrics are still every day. But this means this is only isometrics.
Okay.
So it's basically a rest day, all right? So you're just gonna cycle that on a 3-day rotation, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna progress the drops from low to high. So, like I said, you start low, progress your way up. Sets and reps here, 3 sets of 6 drops. That's it. That's basically, I just keep it right there. Why is that? It's kind of the sweet spot that I found. A lot of jumpers will, I've observed that most jumpers past 18 jumps, they'll start to have pain. Is that still going?
Yep.
Thanks, man.
I just remembered I needed to check.
You didn't do your job. You're fired. All right, so
It's on.
it is on. All right, progression. We're gonna start with, ignore this, ignore the ISOs. We do start with ISOs, then we do slow strength. Then we are going to do what type of storage and release exercise? We're gonna do a box jump. All right, so now that we're able to absorb force, okay, we're able to absorb energy, we need to do storage and release, fast storage and release of energy. All right, so if we're a jumper, box jump is the next one that we're gonna add in, right, up the continuum. Why is that? Because you don't
have to fall.
You don't have to fall, right? So you've done your landings first. Now you're moving into where you're actually loading and releasing, loading the tendon and releasing energy, storing and releasing energy. Box jump is going to be the first one that you do. The next one that we're going to do is a 1-step jump. Basically, it doesn't have to be a dunk, but I use this for Utah dunk camp, so it made sense to do. You're going to do a 1-step jump. Why is that? Higher tendon load. Then you're going to go to a max jump. Then you do the very end of the continuum is a single leg jump, right? So single leg jumping and top end sprinting, those are going to be the highest tendon load, right? Is there anything higher intensity on the Achilles than sprinting, top upright? Maybe a single leg depth jump off like a 50-inch box. No, I'm kidding. Probably like a 30-inch box or something, which you'd have to land on the ball of your foot. Most people wouldn't even land on the ball of their foot. Sprinting is probably going to be the highest intensity thing. So that's how I would progress the storage and release. So how many reps are we going to do, right? How do I do this? So day 1 is my dynamic day. All right, I'm going to jump. I just started adding in jumping. All right, I'm going to do what first?
Isometrics.
Oh, good, nice catch. Yeah, you want to do isometrics. Then what am I going to do? Day 1. I do my box jumps. How many reps and sets? 3 sets of 6. Great, awesome. All right, I wake up the next morning. This throws a wrench in things. My knee hurts. What? What does that mean?
Go back to ISOs.
You have to get rid of the pain.
Yeah, that's a good point. But then what?
Back to ISO.
So you go just ISOs back to the very beginning? I stop doing strength work completely? I go back to the whole beginning of it?
Reduce and go back to
Reduce slow
lightweight
strength.
to slow strength.
You just do step. Yeah, so you could do that. You just move back down the continuum, right? So if you added in the drops, right? Say anytime you add something, if your pain level goes higher than a 3 the next day, you progress too quickly and you need to go back and do that for a session or 2. Typically, every session in the strength work, progressing up about 5 to 10 pounds, you're gonna be good. If you're doing, so if I start at 100 pounds day 1, and I'm alternating, I'm in the strength phase basically. So I do isometrics 1 day, next day I do 100 pounds, right? Day 3 I do isometrics, day 4 I do 105 pounds, 110 pounds, okay? Day 5 I do isometrics, then I do 115 or 120, right? And you just keep climbing your way up. So that part can take a while. Some people will jump way up and they'll basically be like, I started at 200 pounds and I added 5 pounds at a time there. I prefer to slow cook it because it's safer, right? Now, I had an athlete had a 45 inch vertical running, like tested on a Vertec. All right, that was CJ, the guy that got his head to the rim. His buddy Isaiah also can do the same thing. And he started at, I think, 150 pounds and progressed up like 5 to 10 pounds until he was around 250 in a deep squat. All right, so he didn't have pain. If he progresses too quickly because he's moving down the continuum, you'll have pain, right? So you have to move the other direction up the continuum to a normal tendon, which means you have to progress slower, all right? So if I progress too quickly, I just go back to the step previously. If I start at box jump cert, maybe I do my slow strength, maybe I unload it a little bit, or I do isometrics, then I do isometrics the next day. Now I go back to my dynamic day. What am I gonna do? Do I do the box jumps again? No, you guys weren't paying attention. I did box jumps, my knee hurt, I went slow strength, I did isometrics. I go back to the next dynamic day. Am I gonna do box jumps again? No, you're gonna go down. What's below that? Landing, yeah. So you do the landings again, okay? Now your knee feels good. Now you go progress back up to the box jump, all right? And maybe you don't jump as hard, or maybe you do less reps.
Should you always go regress back in the training phase if you feel pain? Because I've heard and read that sometimes increased pain just is a reflection of the healing process. So in some instances,
because we know it causes pain in the tendon, right?
Yeah.
Like some people would say, like pain is maybe a sign of inflammation. Inflammation is a sign of adaptation, right?
Yeah.
There's very little inflammation in a tendon. The pain is dictated by the nerve, so yes. And if it's a tendon, you do not want to progress. You don't want to jump through it. It'll get worse.
And does that depend on what part of the injury spectrum it is? Like for instance, tendinitis versus all the other types of injuries that you were talking about before?
I think you can't possibly know where you're at in the continuum. You could, basically, if I asked an athlete, did you have next day knee pain or did you have next day Achilles pain on your first step out of bed? And if they say yes, then it's a tendinopathy probably. Or if I say, is this consistent? Have you had this issue for a while? I say, you do a bodyweight squat, does it hurt more than a 5? Yeah, okay, then it's a tendinopathy. It's chronic, right? Now, if they just jump one day and their knee hurts a little bit, like Kira felt, her knee was bothering her, she probably induced a little bit of tendinitis, it'll go away in like 3 days, 4 days, because she hasn't had it for a month, 2 months, a year, right? Like some athletes that I deal with, they've had it for years, literally like years, and it's an issue, right? But the majority of the time, that's not. It's going to be a tendinopathy. If it's limiting them, it's probably a tendinopathy, and you're going to just start doing isometrics. So from start to finish, when you start doing this stuff, to get them back to doing something dynamic, it usually takes like a month or 2. That's about the timeline. So most people will be like, "Oh, take off 6 months before it goes away." I'm like, "You're an idiot." Like, that's stupid. That's really dumb. So that's another thing you can tell people, like, it's only gonna be a week before you start doing strength work. It's only gonna be 3 weeks before you start doing drops. It's only gonna be 5 weeks before you start jumping again at some capacity, and that'll keep them motivated. The other thing is, if you're getting their pain to go down, they're gonna buy in like immediately. If I say, "Hey, do this one exercise," and it makes their pain go down immediately, it's like snake oil. Like you're just like, "Ooh, it works! It works! Ooh!" People will think you're a magician. It's incredible. I'm not even kidding. People are like, "You're a genius." I'm like, "No, I'm not." But it is, you will get buy-in very quickly with the isometrics. That's a big thing, okay? The slow strength, there's also a lot of evidence that shows it makes pain go down, but what I've noticed is if you're not at that 70% threshold, it's not long-term gonna make that much of a difference, but you still have to go through that progression, right? So you still have to go slowly adding function to the tendon, or else it's not gonna matter, all right? So the NPS, like I said, this is really important. Now that you're back, okay, you can jump now, you went all the way through the progression, you can jump off a single leg. Typically what you'll do is you'll start to progress up volume within that. So like I said, I'll start guys at like 15 jumps, or even when I start adding in jumps, I'm gonna only do like 5, or like 2 sprints, okay? And then I'll add in maybe another sprint the next session, or whatever else, slowly working in intensity, slowly working in volume. Now they're back, okay? But now they go out and they have a meet and they sprint and their Achilles hurts. And you're like, "Whoa, I failed." No, you didn't. It does depend on how bad their pain is, but typically what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna have them do isometrics, okay? If they overdo it and they weren't ready for a stimulus, you need to go back to the isometrics, get them pain-free, and then the strength work you can kind of dial in accordingly. Sometimes I'll do like 2 days of isometrics or 3 days of isometrics, work in back to strength work, and tone it back on the dynamic work. All right, so you can play with those variables, but your goal ultimately, if someone overdoes it, is to get the pain to go down as soon as possible, right? So usually what I'll do is, like, I had a guy, for example, who jumped. He took 35 jumps. He was supposed to take 10 or 15, right? That's like way more than he was supposed to do. So what did I do? I was like, okay, well, he's at a 6 right now. Like, I need to get him down to a 3. Okay, does the isometrics one day, gets it down to like a 4. Next day, I'm like, do the isometrics again, gets it down to a 2 or a 3, all right? And I'm like, okay, now go back and do your strength work. Next time you go to a session or whatever else, I want you to do 10 jumps, and I want you to cap them. Don't make them as hard as you can, all right? Do like very few jumps, all right? Take out the landing, maybe just do box jumps or something, and then progress them up. But usually, if they're at the point where they're competing, their function is quite high, and it won't take them long to get back to a pain-free tendon, okay? And if you keep pushing it, it will, but that's something else you need to consider. So the NPS, numeric pain scale, is super important. If they're moving up the continuum, you're doing something wrong, right? If every day it's getting worse, you're doing something wrong, okay? Last thing is gonna be chill. The athlete needs to chill. They can't probably go back to training the way they were before. If you have a chronic tendon issue, training them like Devin trains or training them like Jack trains will get them right back to where they were, because the tendon loads and that type of training is super high. Like I couldn't, when I went back to doing what Mike was having me do, jumping twice a week, sprinting 3 days a week, doing plyos 2 days a week, lifting 5-6 days a week, I was always broken because I don't move well. My tendons are already tendinopathic, and I wasn't ready for the capacity or the load that I was being placed on my body. So I was always hurt. Even if I could handle it physiologically, my tendons could not. It would just injure me immediately. All right, so this is why it's really, really important. In terms of the Achilles and stuff, with the dynamic work, typically you start with landings, like single leg landings, and you just use the same exact principles, right? So you could do landings to a small jump or to a baby plyometric, then you could start jogging. Jogging turns into faster running, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, until you're running without or with minimal pain. All right, and then tendons tear when you keep loading the tendon. That's when they tear. So if you just keep doing stuff, help people work through it, just roll out, cross massage, it's gonna get worse. Cross massage, no evidence to support. Like, there's maybe evidence, but it's like weak, very weak evidence. Don't use cross massage. Don't put needles into tendons. What else? Don't do explosive strength work.
Cross
Do
massage
eccentrics.
be in like the Graston and stuff like that as
Don't
well?
massage the tendon. That's one of the biggest mistakes people make. They'll go to a chiro PT, you'll start doing cross massage. I'm like, you don't know what you're doing. You literally don't know what you're doing. Like, that's a pretty quick way to tell that they're not up to date on research, and they just took what someone told them to do.
We were always told to take a cup with water, freeze that,
Mhm.
and then rip the
massage.
cup down and
Yeah,
try to
icing doesn't work either.
cross
That's the other
massage the tendon.
Yeah, with ice. Icing doesn't work either.
Okay.
Because unless it's like reactive tendonitis, it's like immediate, that'll help a little bit. But because tendinopathies are not, and there's no inflammation, you're not gonna do anything. You might, sometimes you'll stop the ingrowth of nociceptive nerve fibers by icing it afterwards, but it's pretty much useless if you're gonna ice. Yes, Dave.
So what's the deal with needling? Because I've read
With what?
Needling the tendon.
Needling the tendon?
Yeah, because I read studies that.
Like, are they actually putting the needle in the tendon though, or are they just like at the skin?
So I've read studies about like PRP injections and HA injections, and that they've accelerated the healing process in the Achilles tendon in like multiple studies. But I think earlier this summer we were talking about this. But can you explain again, like
So
why?
I don't think that those studies were probably conclusive. At least if that's the case, I haven't seen them. I mean, there's different types of injections that you can get, but there's a lot of evidence that shows that putting a needle in the tendon actually damages it and actually makes it worse. And actually, there's less. So when you have a degenerative tendon, your cell is hypercellular, or your tendon is hypercellular, and you produce more collagen matrix than a normal person, right? So you actually get to a point where you have more healthy tendon than you do a normal tendon. You actually get to that point, but you also have this giant dead portion of the tendon too. And when you put a needle in there, what they saw was it actually reversed. It didn't reverse it, but you ended up not having as much healthy tendon. You actually lost healthy tendon. So you don't want to be putting needles in the tendon because it makes it worse. Like, now, I think there is a little bit of research on the Achilles with PRP and stuff like that, but we know, like, load management is a successful means of doing it. If you're doing PRP or whatever, you're putting a Band-Aid on it. Because what's the goal of PRP, right? You induce like supra-inflammation, right? And then you basically put inflammatory markers in there that are meant to repair the tendon, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the tendon's actually going to repair because it's not capable of bearing load anymore, right? Typically you unload the tendon for like 4 weeks after you do that. And you put a needle inside of it. So you just ripped all the collagen fibers by putting a needle inside of it and injecting a bunch of shit. So like, probably not going to be a very good idea in the way of trying to get healthy.
But I have heard of studies that they do it post-surgery, so they're applying it to parts carefully so that it's like not damaging that part of the Achilles.
No, that would make sense because you already have a ton of, well, the thing with that is you probably already have a ton of inflammation, so excess inflammatory markers, it might actually speed that process up. Yeah. Like that's kind of like a specific example, but I'm talking about people that have like a 5 out of 10 and they're like, I'm just gonna go get PRP. I'm like, that's probably not a good idea. Like probably would not put I would probably not put a needle in there, you're not at that point. Even when you tear a tendon, like I partially tore my patella, I'm fairly confident. Doing this made it better. It just took a lot of time, like to get to the point where it was better. I will say 2 tendons that this I found that is not super effective is the quadricep tendon and the hamstring, distal hamstring. Okay, so compressive forces pushing on the tendon can also cause tendinopathy. Like hamstring tendon, like holding downward dog pushes the hamstring tendon into the ischial tuberosity. That makes it worse. Okay, like compressive forces. So typically you have to remove compressive forces and do the exact same continuum. So keep that in mind. But the quadricep tendon and the distal hamstring, I've had case studies of people that just did a ton of super lightweight exercises for like a ton of reps, and then their pain level goes down. That's kind of weird. I don't know why. It's not really observed, but yeah, I've had that also happen.
Quadriceps tendon is just above the patella?
Yeah, it's just here, just where all the quads insert on the top of the patella. But sometimes jumpers get that, like stuff like that, but it's not super common. Any other questions?
So the tendon's actually repairing from all this? Like the isometrics,
If
strength, that sort of stuff?
it's moving up or down the continuum. If it's tendinopathic, it means that there's a pathology, meaning it has changed forever. But you can move up and down that continuum to basically,
so like
it can move into a normal tendon, basically. Okay. Like, if you go back to that slide, I'm fairly confident it can move.
I was really confused by the graphic.
Yeah, so if you have a tendinopathic tendon, you're down here. Interventions addressing core function and load capacity. Interventions directed at pain. So if you're here, you're trying to move this direction, and you're trying to get it to where you have tendon disrepair, but you're addressing the function and the load capacity and the pain, right? Versus if you're here, typically what happens is this is the tendon, you have a portion of it where it's reactive and you're trying to move it to normal, and it can move to normal. But if you're down here where you have just a straight disrepair or degenerative, you have tendon disrepair on a degenerative tendinopathy, you're trying to move that down the continuum. This is like healthy tendon with a little bit of reactive tendinopathy, healthy tendon with more reactive tendinopathy, and it can still return to the normal structure. Okay, but once you're here, now you're moving laterally. You can't move out of this stage up the continuum to a normal tendon. You can only move laterally across. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So what they say is basically you want to strengthen the donut. You don't want to strengthen the whole. All right, so you'll have a portion of the tendon that's dead, and you're trying to address the healthy part of the tendon. The dead part of the tendon you can't make better. So you just strengthen all around it and try to make that better. You're not going to take it out of disrepair or degeneration. It's dead already. It's necrotic. If you put an ultrasound on it, it's dead tissue.
Does that mean that do you feel like that caps your performance? Like,
no, because if you have a tendinopathy, you're hypercellular and you produce more collagen matrix during that time. So you actually have the same amount of healthy tendon as a normal person.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter. That's why the structure doesn't matter. That's why I said address pain, right? Address function, because your structure, you can only change that. You can't change the structure. You can to a certain extent, but like you're not going to change the actual degenerative part of the tendon. Mm-hmm. Typically, they have observed basically what happens is your collagen, you change the amount of collagen in the tendon, and then over time it goes back to producing a normal tendon. So it's like you produce the really weak collagen, the weak collagen starts to bind together, realign, and then you replace it with strong collagen, and then it gets healthy. But most of the time, pain and the strength of the tendon is going to be, or the function is what you're addressing. It's probably not going to tear because tendons are super healthy. But if the whole thing's degenerative and you keep jumping and it's painful, then you're at risk of it tearing, like, which is obviously the worst case scenario.
Alright, so I'm probably at a low risk for tearing a tendon if I haven't been having pain.
Likely, yeah. You would have known. You would have had to jump through pain for like a long time
Okay.
for it to be pain free. Vanessa, did you fall asleep?
No, I was writing my story. I also followed you.
You did? Oh my gosh! Wow.
I expected all that.
Self-esteem.
Flattered. Flattered. I don't have a self-esteem.
Oh yeah, that's
I'm a robot. That's it.
Thank you,
All
John.
right, that's it.
Thanks, John.
It's useful.
What did you say, thank God?
Will this be online somewhere? Or are you
What's
just
that?
recording that for your purposes?
It's gonna be on the line, maybe.
Online?
On the line.
On the line.
We'll put
I
it
gotta
on the
go
line.
because I have to grab.
You have to